Well, folks, now welcoming to the stage our next guest, Sean KB. Sean of the Antifada. Sean, welcome to the show.
Hey, hi, thank you. It's a pleasure to
Yeah,
be back with you, Matt.
it's good to catch up with you. I don't know how long it's been, but it's probably a
It's
significant amount of
years, I would say, certainly. If
time.
people don't know, Matt Leck was a founding member of the Antifada podcast, which is now like 5 years running. So it's been a long time. It's good to be back, man.
Damn, that's right. I do remember that recording session all those years ago
It
now.
was like it was like 3 or 4 recording sessions. And it's nice of you
Yeah,
to remember them.
it feels so long ago, honestly. It's like all pre-COVID, like
Yeah.
nothing from that time period
It,
makes any sense to me.
It was a long time experientially for us as human beings. It was sure has been a long time politically. And I think, as we'll get into today, a long time economically as well. You like that little key up right there? That's
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 I
how we
mean
do
that's
it.
That's why we
perfect.
love having
Boom.
pros on the show, man.
Exactly. This is why you have another podcast host on, because he just comes on and
Yeah.
starts hosting his own podcast. This I mean, speaking of the passage of time, we have exhibited a freak out of that. I mean, first let's start with our good buddy Michael Schellenberger. Uh, Michael writes, yeah, here he is. Let me just make sure I have this up here. Some polls that have been getting a lot of traction from the Wall Street Journal here. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Actually, I made that smaller, didn't I?
Money's
Uh,
money's up,
yeah,
patriotism's down.
the evidence. Well, yeah, let's look at the numbers first before we look at the interpretations. Percent who say these values are very important to them. So patriotism. This is from 1998 to 2023. Folks listening at home, patriotism was at 70% in 1998. So
That's
like
pretty good patriotism numbers, man.
our
That's pretty good.
like at that point the thinking was like our president got a blowjob. That's cool, I guess, and we're just gonna be happy about that.
I did not
Um,
have sexual relations with that woman.
and I wonder what it did after 9/11, but we only have these. We only have
Very
1998.
very wild
Wild.
jumps here.
That x-axis is wild right there, man.
Like, and this is like, yeah, this is Wall Street Journal. Like, why? What are you guys doing? Like, can we get some more sustained?
You'd think of all fucking people, man, they would know how to use a goddamn chart function, but
So religion was very important to 62% of people in 1998, now down to 39, basically straight downward trajectory. Having children, that's also straight down. Community involvement spiked after 9/11.
mm.
In 2019. Like, I don't, again, like the time periods make this very difficult because 1998 and then between 98 and 2019, that's 21 years.
Yeah, and then 5 years, it goes from 62 to 27. Damn, I guess that's COVID, right?
Yeah,
That,
100%.
I mean, that one has to be COVID.
You'd
I
think
think.
that community involvement would be people would be like, "Yeah, that's important because I don't have it anymore."
I mean, Robin DiAngelo did publish a book, I think, probably in that period. So maybe it was, wokeness.
Wokeness
Uh,
did it.
and then money. Well, only first of all, this methodology is suspect to me because you're only finding 31% of people in 1998 saying that money is very important to them.
Yeah, it was a different time, man. It was before that dot-com bubble burst, so everyone was like, "Money, who cares? I've got so much in pets.com right now." What I don't even think about that shit.
And so like now we're at 43%. So more and more people are going to money. Now that one to me seems like, oh yeah, this poll seems like I could explain this with my ideology. um, but we have a whole bunch of different people weighing in on this. Let's start with Michael Schellenberger. He writes, the evidence is now overwhelming that recent panics around climate, race, and sex, the mass desire to conform to a strict moral, he writes in parentheses, woke code, stem from A, the acute need of liberal secular people for purpose, B, rising loneliness, and C, mass anxiety created by social media. Is there anything that you spot the lie, guys?
Yeah, mass anxiety created by social media. Who is Schellenberger? Is he like a Compact Magazine fella?
No, so Schellenberger is now at Twitter Files. I think he's the two under Taibbi for the Twitter Files. He's also previously ran for office and was
Okay,
sort of
really?
yeah, and like David, he's a pro-nuclear activist.
Oh, well, I
But
support
also
that.
no, so me too. But he's also a lukewarm kind of like climate change isn't really happening, and we don't really need to do anything about it,
Right.
kind of guy. So that's who Schellenberger is. But
Gotcha.
he's also a guy who's like basically his response to the criminal not houselessness. He basically says we need to round people up and force them into compulsory
Whoa.
sort of
Relocation.
or like addiction
Oh,
services. And
Okay.
what's standing in the way of those people getting help isn't like the cost of that sort of care. It's that a cults related to like defund or police reform have gotten into city council.
I
So
love it
that's the real
when the right
obstacle.
tries to think constructively, man.
Well, I mean, that's what we're at. So like, I don't know if there's much on that Schellenberg. I mean, it's the
No, I mean,
classic. Let's pathologize this instead of look at any sort of structural problem here.
I mean, I know we're going to talk about Ben Shapiro in a second, but it's just like, all of these folks, they have to recognize that there is like a lack in sociability, that like people are anxious, that things are wrong. But it's not capitalism, right? It's
Right.
not that things have gotten worse. So you have to come up with, and like, I give them some credit because like when I have to think a little, like I feel very lucky sometimes to be a Marxist because like you have these tools that you can use to sort of understand the world. If I had to come up with a creative story every time some new data was put in front of me, it'd be really tough, right?
Turns out you don't really even have to get that creative these days because the woke panic has made it so that there's now like a single issue way to get into this, not in like a Marxist sense of like understanding the totality and the way in which like the economy and politics and society all interact with one another, but no, it's like the evil wokes are taking are pulling Western civilization apart. So it's pretty easy, I think, for a guy like that, right?
Yeah, I guess
Pretty
you're
simple.
being too sympathetic. No, but like the thing is also, it's like this is the world that y'all asked for and you got. You know what I mean? Like, like the
Right.
lack of sociability, like the lack of community. These are all, I mean, this is like Margaret Thatcher's dream. I mean, she's talking
Yeah.
about this. This is what we want to do in society. There is no society. And now you have like, Ben Shapiro and this fella, going on and getting worked up about, oh no, people are isolated, right? It's like, well, this is exactly the kind of world that y'all wanted to create.
Isolated economic actors, right? Margaret Thatcher famously said there's no such thing as society, only individuals and families. People often leave the families part outside, but like, yeah, people sure saw a lot of their families over the last several years, but not much of anybody else. It's like the conservative movement, really the mainstream of it over the last 30, 40 years has been the sort of coalition, the synthesis between religious conservatism on the one hand and then free market liberalism on the other. And those two, up till 1998, it seemed, kind of lived in some sort of harmony. Certainly it's like into the aughts and then into the teens, kind of declined a little bit. But nobody ever told them, or they never figured out at a certain point, that those two things actually work at cross purposes. That if you have this sense of like a social conservatism, like you want to stop social change when it comes to these particular elements of society, like the family or religion or whatever, you're completely working at cross purposes if you're letting like the anarchy of the market and the absolute fucking devastation that capitalist social relations and deindustrialization and all these things that we've seen over recent decades does to not just individuals and families, but sociality in general and society. So you're creating a society of individual atomized monads rather, and nomads these days too, alienated from one another. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, why? They're like poking religion with a stick. Like, why aren't you doing the thing you're supposed to be doing anymore? And it's because you've secularized society. That's what capitalism does too. So the whole thing, you're right. Like, this is what these people ultimately wanted. And of course, at the end of the day, like the money, like over the last 5 years going up is such the signal to me that, you have basically market imperatives and capitalist social relations and all of the, again, like chaos that brings and alienation, overtaking those other parts of the conservative project, which were meant to stand athwart history and yell stop.
Like, I know
Yeah,
these
I
are
mean,
their favorite words, but like it is amazing to hear like James Lindsay and all these folks go on about like the collectivist ideology and how powerful it is right now, and how we need to like return to individuality. When I don't know. I mean, like maybe I'm being ahistorical, but like I feel like this is probably at its zenith, right? The sense of individuality. I mean, from everything, you even see it mirrored on the left too. It's like everyone like hyper identifies, like I'm this very particular, specific individual kind of like politics. You
Yeah.
see it in relationships, etc. Like everything is like hyper individualized right now. Like
Yeah,
like
no, the left, it's like you over the course of a year, somebody in their teens or 20s goes from like a monarchist like Habsburg stan to like a deep green resistance, and then they go and they transfer into like a free market like ANCAP, and then oh, my new identity now is I'm like a Hojaist, and like I stand Deng Xiaoping thought and Marxism Leninism in the age of multipolarity. And it seems like something that's crazy to the left, this idea of like this individualized identity that one takes on that doesn't actually have any practice to it, But the right is the same thing.
Mhm.
Like you see these people scrambling in order to like define themselves, and especially in the sort of like clout chasing environment that is social media, define themselves by ever more extreme individual takes that they have, to where like now people on the right are split between what, like America Firsters, what's that little shithead's name,
The
the little
little
guy
guy, is
from
it
Florida.
Fuentes?
Yeah,
Oh no, it's DeSantis.
Fuentes. Well, and then DeSantis, and then Trump, and then the Nietzschean, like the gay bodybuilders, and then there's like the anti-woke guys. And like everybody's politics now is a hyper individualized politics, because the only politics that really remains is like the same dull fucking sort of neoliberal bullshit politics that always
Mhm.
ever existed. But with Trump, at least you get it with a little bit of individual flair.
I mean, isn't this sort of what Engels was on about in the working class in England? Like the way the capitalism goes after the family. It's been a while since I read that, but I remember like you could read that very conservatively, and instead, like you say, like conservatives have to go to like here's Ben Shapiro. America has destroyed its intermediate institutions for at least half of its population. I like that America did that. Like America's
Yeah.
just like, yeah, let's get rid of these intermediate institutions. I fucking hate
Yeah.
those things. Like
Let's
who
not
decided
even
that?
let's not even look at Europe or like South America or East
That's
Asia.
just the
Like
most awesome aspect of the conservatives, man.
it's incredible. Like it's almost as though there's some sort of like secular tangential sort of like world historical effect again that capitalism has, not just in America but around the world. And we'll get back to this when we get to inflation, because they want to blame like Biden's individual or Biden's like policy choices around fiscal and monetary policy to blame world inflation for, which is totally nuts. Like this is not an America destroyed, it's like capitalism destroyed. Anyways, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, we're in humanities, not economics right now. And as per Robert Nisbet, who I don't know who Robert Nisbet is.
He's a
Um,
sociologist. Yeah.
the result of atomizing, blah blah blah, and then he goes with
He drops the Tocqueville, bro.
he drops the
Oh
Tocqueville.
no, God, the last refuge of scoundrels.
And
It
look at
just
the
yo,
size of this
This is
shit.
motherfucker.
what Musk has given us. Thank you, Musk.
Oh my God. No offense, dude. Bro, that was 200 fucking years ago, man. I mean, I'm not saying that like I'm just reaching for
I'm
the
just,
Tocqueville at this late date, bro.
it's so fun. I mean, conservatives and de Tocqueville is very. There's an amusing sort of dependency going
like,
on there. Like whenever they have to get thoughtful.
Also, like Tocqueville, I mean, not surprising for him to grab it, but like Tocqueville was somebody who comes to this country and he's all freaked out by the shit that's happening in America, right? Because he's like a fancy pants aristocratic boy. And he's like, I'm nervous about what France is going to look like in my
Yeah.
lifetime if they start mirroring some of the shit that's happening in the U.S. Right?
Like these
And,
people are way too democratic. These Americans just do far too much democracy on all levels.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know, it's just one of those things. I can't remember. It's like a few years back, but like Tocqueville was like always up there, like number one, like cited guy on the floor of Congress. And it's like if you've ever read Tocqueville, he'll be like, democracy is a great system. And then that's what the congressman like quotes, and then he says, "But it's also evil because it lets like poor people like
Yeah. That's always the sense I get from conservatives who love Tocqueville. It's like It's like I'm a Republican, small r, but heavy lays the crown because we need to like whip these peasants into fucking action. Like,
Well, like the longer historical argument, of course, is that America in the last 200 years has had a couple of like social and economic changes to it, and so the sort of like small r republicanism and the small d democracy that Tocqueville could go around the American North and the American South and the American Midwest and see like small town democracy in action, and this sort of like rough egalitarianism that existed between roughly social equals, on the small scale. But like, oh boy, did industrial capitalism really turn that on its head. So the sort of Jeffersonian ideals that de Tocqueville's talking about aren't they still exist now in this country, but now instead of expressing themselves in like the white settler colonial yeoman farmer, and that economic unit, instead all that's left is like small business people who are being utterly fucking crushed right now. So like trotting these things out from centuries ago, it's like an interesting, and I see why they want to do it, but this country has just changed so radically since then, for better or worse, that it's the last refuge of scoundrels, I say.
yeah, that's a nice bedtime story. Go ahead, David.
No, I mean, I know we're going to switch to talking about economics in a second, but I'm just curious, since we have you here, Sean, like, what do you make of, there's been like all this excitement, or excitement might be the wrong word, attention, to like the new formations of the right, that some of them are a little bit more willing to talk about,
Baby
economics,
bucks.
and it's like,
JD
what?
Vance said baby bucks. If you get a kid, you
Yeah.
might get baby bucks. Yeah.
I mean, like, I have my take on it, but I'm like curious if, like, if you think that this is something that is a real general shift in some parts of the right, if it's something that they have the opportunity to do it because so many people in the Democratic Party have completely abandoned that space. I'm just curious if you have any like thoughts about like the so-called like new right figures and what they're sort of representing.
Yeah, no, that's a big and a really good question. One that I don't really get into all that much, despite our podcast being called the Antifada. We don't do like all that. Andy does some stuff about anti-fascism and stuff, but we've kind of moved to doing mostly history and political economy
Oh,
and
yeah.
stuff like that. But on that front, I think like where not just the right in this country, but also to an extent the left and the center is going through something that you can't really chalk up to like shifts in the realm of ideas. Like we have to understand, and this is maybe a good segue to talking about the banking crisis. Where this country is going through like a world historic crisis right now, and has been for at least for 15, maybe 20 years at this point, 2001 or 2008, depending on where you go with it. The vital center, such as it was called, the center that we saw with, say, Mitt Romney versus Barack Obama, is holding on for dear life. It's kind of reconstituting itself within the Democratic Party at this point, with the sort of left wing of the Republicans coming into it. And in the meanwhile, at the edges on the left, of course, you have everything we know about rise of the DSA, rise of socialism again, real disaffectedness by like large swaths of the population towards progressivism or liberalism or whatever. And on the right, the way this expressed itself, of course, was very dramatically in the rise of Donald Trump. But now after Trump, there was all the during his presidency, there was all the QAnon conspiracy theorizing. And then after, of course, there's been all the election stealing stuff. But I think that conservatives, it's largely a petty bourgeois movement. And I mean that in like the class sense. I don't mean that in like the pejorative sense. These are people who are either like in a position because they're credentialed to be so. They're in like high-end media jobs, or they're representing like small business owners or clerks or whatever. These sorts of people feel squeezed in a million different directions, and they saw their great white hope of Donald Trump really be unable to change anything, not even just unwilling, but unable to. So I think this caused a real crisis, along with the tendencies that we were talking about before, which come out of this fusion of religious and free market conservatism that has really failed on its own terms, utterly failed. And so I see the right now, it's hard to call it fascist. I always kind of tell people to be careful with the F word, which often tends to like make analogies that don't really bear out that well in history. You are seeing a rise of like Nietzschean bullshit on the
Yeah.
far right with the gay bodybuilders and shit like that. You're seeing the rise of like real serious on the racial front, like anti-egalitarian, like
Mhm.
race realism and stuff like that. But you don't need in this country to import Italian or German fascism in order to have a right-wing politics that looks pretty fucking scary. In fact, our flag in the United States of America is drenched with just enough, with so much blood, that all you really need to do is raise up those old small r Republican principles. And in this current moment in time, those start to become very reactionary very, very fast. So it's difficult to say, there's a context to that rise. It's difficult to say where they're going because it's difficult to see a way in which, after Trump, the sort of forces that he represented but also unleashed, how those could actually practically manifest themselves in American politics with so much pushing against the sort of like racialism and nativism that these people ascribe to.